Haley Show, and my guest today is an author that's a best-selling author. He's has a Florida-based thriller he wants to talk about. David Bethel. I guess David, thanks for stopping by, man. And it's always interesting, the author game, right? Your whole career, you were doing a lot of amazing things, and then decided to become a writer, right?
Right. And well, decided kind of it seemed like the most logical career move since I'd been writing my whole life. I just hadn't been writing fiction. So the next move appeared to be writing fiction. It's worked out.
And kind of tell us that transition, what you were as a writer before writing books.
Well, I was working on Capitol Hill in Washington for congressmen and senators, and that kind of took me into the world of into the world of fiction, political fiction, political thriller fiction. Backing up a step, I worked for a senator by the name of Paul Laxalt from Nevada, and he was very close to Ronald Reagan when he was president. They were both governors of neighboring states for many years, and they became personally and professionally friendly. That was a segue into the Reagan administration, where I worked for various cabinet secretaries, and then that segued into my life as a writer of both political and psychological thrillers.
That's an interesting journey, to say the least, because you I'm interested in kind of touching that political world. What did you do when you wrote for them?
A speechwriter and also
Ooh,
press secretary. So there were lots of things other than speeches. You do write floor speeches, you write congressional testimony. Of course, it depends on who you're working for, but generally it covers all press releases. It touches all the bases.
but the speech writing, that's interesting, right? Thinking about the audience, understanding the words of that person, and being able to convey to the audience what you want. That's a challenge. It's not easy.
Yeah, well, you have to adopt the voice of the person you're writing for, and sometimes that can be problematic depending on the personalities that both of you have. With Senator Laxalt, it was very easy because I guess we thought alike, we talked alike, and there wasn't much of a transition at all. With the cabinet secretaries, it's a little more of a journey because, for instance, I worked for the Secretary of Education. He was an academic, so I
Hmm.
had to change my voice a little to do that. And then I went over and worked for Don Evans at Commerce. He was a businessman, so he had a completely different vocabulary and a way of looking at things. So yeah, you have to adapt.
And what do you think is needed today with AI when it comes to writing? Do you think any of them are using AI to write speeches or come up with ideas in Capitol Hill right now?
Well, I'm sure I don't know much about AI, but I am sure if there is a way to use AI to promote their next election, they are using it. I imagine what you'd have to do is feed in a lot of information on the policies that you're dealing with and the world that you're dealing in order for AI to be productive. But yeah, if they can figure out a way to use it, they're going to be using it.
And this is the thing that everyone knocks is, oh, it's inaccurate. It's this, it's that. You got to give it input. So it has to be, you have to have good writing or good ideas to get good information out of AI. If
Well,
you
yeah,
if you don't
garbage
feed
in,
them,
garbage out.
and that's the thing, you're looking at a regular human being, but it's not a human being, it's a life form that you have to feed information to. So it cracks me up when people think, well, it's going to take over all these things. No, it's going to enhance things. And we have to be willing to adjust to these things. But I'm just wondering, for example, if I was like working for a campaign and I'd say, I don't have the experience you have, I'd say, okay, give me your ideas, let's jot them down on paper, throw an AI, and it's done. That's probably the change that will help speechwriters as well, because they'll be able to target that voice in a much quicker pace so that you can revise 5 speeches, because probably it took a lot longer to write speeches, right?
Oh, it took forever. I mean, yes, it took forever to write a speech, a good speech. Now, there were times when you just had to, work by the seat of your pants because you found out in 15 minutes you had to get out in front of a bunch of cameras and say something. But yes, generally, if you're being thoughtful, if you're writing, say the Detroit economics club, or as opposed to the Ely Rotary Club, your language is going to change. Also, the degree of difficulty of the speech, because the audience that you're speaking to at the Detroit Economics Club, if you slip, they're going to know it. That's not to knock the people in the smaller towns, but they may not come up with the with the problem as fast as someone else might.
Speech is very, very important. Very, very important process of revising as a writer. That's probably what I like ideas and like writing, but I don't want to edit. And those editors, good. Oh my goodness. So let's talk about, then you decide to write books, some of the books you've written, and we'll talk about your latest without giving it away, of course.
Okay, fine. Yes. Well, I mean, as I said, I just kind of transitioned into it, and most of my books are based on true crime. So, you take a kernel of true crime. And the way I write may be a little bit different than maybe some authors. I call it writing by the seat of my pants. I just sit down, I have an idea, I put that idea down, and I go from there. Sometimes I definitely have no idea where it's going. I have no idea how it's going to end. Sometimes I don't even know what the next page is. But the way I describe it is, I want to write the way I read. I want to be surprised by what's coming up next. My creative process is stunted if I work from a let's say an outline or something else, because I know what's coming next. It disturbs my creative process. So for me, working by the seat of my pants works for me.
That's interesting. But again, it's okay as a writer to write books by the seat of your pants than jumping last minute. Here's a book for revision. No, that doesn't work that way. All right. So let's talk about, like, you have your, kind of give us the history of your novels, your true crime leading up to this latest one, without, so everyone should check out all your books.
Well, I mean, I'll go through a couple. Blood Moon is a true story. Actually, most of it is a true story. It was brought to me by a private investigator who worked with the victim of a kidnapping, torture, and extortion. This was in the early '90s, so there weren't all the social media and the technology that you have now available to him. So when he was kidnapped and he disappeared, it wasn't as easy to find out where he went, especially since his wife was Colombian, spoke very little English, and he extracted a promise from the kidnappers: if they let her go to Colombia, he would give them what they wanted, which basically what happened. They extorted millions of dollars from him. He was a very successful entrepreneur. And they then tried to kill him. They tried to get rid of him. Actually, interestingly, they were living in his house, because they got him to sign the deed of his house over to him. So they were living there while they were doing all this stuff. They drove his car into a telephone pole. They had propane gas in the back, so the car exploded. And by all means, he should have expired right there. But they forgot to put the seatbelt on him, so he fell out of the car. Now he doesn't remember any of this, but they put these pieces together afterwards. So he falls out. He stands up, and the kidnappers see him stand up, so they get in their car and they run him over. But they missed him in the sense that he fell between the wheels, so he lived. By then, the car was on fire. They had to they had to leave, and so eventually they dragged this guy to the hospital. But he was so messed up that he could not really explain to them what had happened to him. By the time he came to his senses, they thought he was just a street bum who
Oh
got
man.
well, there were two things. First of all, they thought he was just a a layabout. Then they realized he was Argentinian. And they thought, okay, this was in the middle of the cocaine cowboy thing going on in Miami. They figured the police dismissed it because they said, oh, he was just one of these guys. They're having their little internecine wars, and he got caught up in that. So he picks up the phone finally when he can't get anybody else to help him, and calls a lawyer, who calls the guy who called me, the private detective. And so he says, you got to help me put this story together, because I have to do something. Backing up a second again, they did finally catch the guys who did it, but only after they killed two more people. So they brought him to court, and it was finally taken care of. But the thing was, the private investigator was helping consult in a movie that was being made of this whole thing called Pain and Gain. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Nah.
Mark Wahlberg and The Rock. I can't remember his
Oh,
name,
okay.
Anyway, but he was very upset because they were trying to make it into a black comedy. That's why he called me, and that's how I got involved in it. So, true crime, true incident. Wrote a book on it. Then there's some others. Wretched was another one that was taken from about a guy who was actually a bully in a town for 30 years, and he was taking sexual advantages of the women and the girls. He was stealing their livestock. Now this is out in a rural county, so a little bit different than doing it in somewhere else.
Yeah.
And one day the townspeople got tired of it and they shot him. They killed him. They surrounded his car. Two of the people they all had guns, but only two people had guns that they were going to shoot. So two people shot him. 30 people disappeared into the woodwork. They did investigations for years, local, state, and even the FBI, but nobody would talk about it. So, that was another kernel of a true crime novel that I wrote. And then, of course, the one that we're talking about today is Mapping the Night, the newest one. What happened was I read an article in the New York Times about cops who were doing a welfare check on a woman and her son. They hadn't seen him in 2 days. They got worried about him. They went in, they found her dead, strangled, and the boy was sitting next to her bed. He's 4, 5, 6 years old, very young. And he had ice, and he was putting ice on her head because that's what she did to make him feel better when he was sick. So the cops walked into this very haunting scene
Oh
that kind
my.
of it stuck with me, that the scene. Then later on, when I followed up on it, I found out there were couple of other elements of the story that made it worth telling. For instance, the guy just preyed on women with young sons, and he also would clean the apartments when he was finished doing what he did. Not clean them as in just to get rid of his fingerprints and any sign that he had been there, but he cleaned the damn apartments completely. So these elements, struck a chord with me, and I use that as the beginning and the kickoff for my novel, Mapping the Night. But that's a long way of explaining to you how I find my stories.
Oh, it's intriguing. And so you really love doing these true crimes. It seems like a lot of
Oh
fun.
yeah, I enjoy it because I read a lot of true crime books, and you always get the who, what, when, where, but I wanted to know the why. I was interested in getting inside the head of these, a lot of these deviant personalities, and trying to figure out what it is that makes them tick. And hopefully that's what I provide the viewer, the viewer. That's what I provide the
Yeah.
reader. By the time they get to the end of the book, they have some idea of how these people think. Now, having said that, there is no way of really understanding a deviant mind like some of these people had. I mean, start talking about Ted Bundy and Ed
Yeah.
Kemper, and, the Night Stalker and all these other people. You're never going to get inside their head. And to the matter of fact, John Douglas, who was the premier profiler, put together the whole profiling genre, said, if you think you are ever going to understand these people, then you need your head examined.
Wow. It's quite interesting. And do you want to create these in the movies series at one point in time? Is that a goal?
Oh, well, if that happens, that would be wonderful. And you bring up something it's very near and dear to my heart, because I often get asked by people who want to write, what are the things, how should I go about this? And my comments, one of the comments I make is, if you think that you're going to sit down and write a bestseller of the great American novel, or you're going to have this bought up by some movie studio and you're going to be walking the red carpet, you're in the wrong business. I mean, you write because you want to write. If you
Right.
sit down and you want to write something, then you write it, but do not go into it thinking that something like that's going to happen to you, because the chances are slim to none that something like that's going to
And
happen.
then also, selling books. It's a hard thing. It's not easy. Don't go into it just to look at the book sales. Go into it for the love of writing books.
Exactly. You have to be a writer writes. That's what a writer does. If you want to write, then you're a writer. You're not a writer because any of this other wonderful stuff is going to happen to you.
Wow. But again, you have all the skills with your years in writing and your creativity from these experiences you've had, and the ability to be asked to write these different things. Do you have a specific goal you'd like to obtain as a writer?
Not really. I mean, that's a tough thing to answer. Um, I I write because I want people to read and enjoy my books. I think that's presumptuous maybe, or simple-minded, but that's the basic answer I
That's
give.
where the success is going to come. Now,
Yeah,
do you
whenever
have
I
a
get,
good, do you have a lot, your reading fault? Do you try to keep up with your readers and have meet with them and different things, or at least have conversations via social media and stuff with them?
oh, I do. I have a social media presence, so there's some of that, and with people like you, who I can sit and talk to, and hopefully that will reach the reading public as well. But basically, if I get a one review that says they enjoyed the book, I'm happy. I read that review over and over and over again. So every time I get a review of a book, I read it and I feel much better about the fact that I sit 4 and 5 hours a day, 6 months out of the year writing a book.
Only 6 months of the year, not the whole year.
No, no, not the whole year.
Ah, okay. All right, but still the 4 or 5 hours a day. Oh, because you have the book out, then you have to promote it for the 6 months. Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that pretty much the process? 6 months, right? Release, promote, back to the next book.
exactly. Yeah, it's a never ending kind of cycle, and I feel sorry for my wife, I because she always says, even when after you've done, you come out of your cave. um, I still can't talk to you because you're still thinking about the damn book. And I'll say, this such and such needs to be done. And she says, I know I'm not getting through to you. I have to practically stand in front of your face and scream at you to get you to understand what I need done. So, she's been very patient with me all these years.
Writers are in their own world. I represent tons of them in my agency for social media. And guess what? They're different. You're different. There's something that makes you passionate about creating your own world. And
Yeah,
that's what you guys do, is create your own world.
and people do things for different reasons. Again, that sounds simple, but I mean, a painter paints. Someone goes out and they're a politician. They want to change the world, whatever. A writer simply wants to create and wants people to enjoy that creation.
All right. Best place people can find information. Where can they go?
You can go to Amazon and type in John David Bethel. You can go to Goodreads and do the same thing, or you can go to my website, www.johndavidbethel.com, and I will pop up on that for you.
All right. Thanks again. Appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
You're listening and watching The Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.